Well, welcome everyone. It's 2 o'clock, so let's get started. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Ballot Success, a case study with Riverside Public Library. My name is Angela Hursh, and I am Senior Engagement Consultant for NoveList. In case you were wondering, we are recording today's webinar, so in a few days, you'll be receiving a link to a recording so you can rewatch it, share it with your coworkers. If you have a question during today's webinar, you can go ahead and type it into the chat and make sure you set your drop-down menu to everyone so we can see your question. And we will be answering questions at various points throughout the webinar, so stay tuned for that. Before we get started, we want to let you know that you can hire a NoveList expert to empower your staff with storytelling skills so they can advocate for your library even when you don't have an issue on the ballot. You can also give your staff the skills to create effective marketing and enhance your readers' advisory services. Our sessions are all built for remote learning, and they're interactive and they're fun. So you can check out the offerings and contact us for a free consultation. We put the link in the chat for you, so go ahead and click on that and bookmark it for later. You are guaranteed to learn a great deal today from our two presenters. Diane Silva is the Assistant Director of Riverside Public Library in Riverside, Illinois. In March of 2020, right at the beginning of the pandemic, her community approved a ballot measure that raised $1.5 million to complete the renovation of their library. And that measure passed with 76% support. So you're going to learn a lot from Diane today. And then we're going to hear from John Kratzka, who is the Executive Director of EveryLibrary. EveryLibrary is the first nationwide political action committee for libraries. It focuses on supporting local library communities and helping them talk to voters about measures on their local ballots like levies, bonds, and other referendum. A NoveList has partnered with EveryLibrary since 2019. We worked with them to develop templates for print materials, e-blasts, web graphics, social media posts, even door hangers to support libraries who want to run an information-only campaign. And we've also done 2 previous webinars together on promoting your library that you can find on the NoveList YouTube channel. And a quick reminder, if you are a library aware customer, you're going to want to stick around after the main webinar for a short training session. And I'm going to go through how to use library aware templates to edit and post library advocacy and marketing materials. But first, let's get started. First up is Diane Silva, who's going to talk about how Riverside Library advocated for their ballot measure and built support without crossing that line into campaigning. Diane.
Thank you so much, Angela. I'm so excited that I could be here from Riverside, Illinois. Before I jump in, I'm going to give you guys just a minor technology warning. So I'm sitting in one of our brand new offices that we built with our fine referendum money, and I just learned that the lights go off if I don't move around enough. So if periodically it goes dark and I have to wiggle just a little bit, just know I'm still here and possibly in the dark. So as Angela said, my name is Diane Silva. I'm the Assistant Director at the Riverside Public Library. And I think our story begins like all of our stories do, and that is with a community. Our library is part of this community that we call Riverside. So Riverside, for all of you all over the country who know nothing about us, we are located 10 miles west of downtown Chicago. We're right along the Des Plaines River. You can kind of see a picture of the back of our library right on this slide. We are a fairly unique place that's steeped in history. The village was actually designed by Frederick Law Olmsted and his often forgotten partner, Calvert Vaux, and that was in 1869. It's considered one of the first planned communities in the United States. In fact, we were designated a National Historic Landmark in 1970. We have a population that rests just under 9,000. So being so close to a city, we are a very small village with a very small town feel. Our library was built in 1931. So you can see from these pictures, it is also a building that is rooted in a lot of history. We are historic landmark #1 in our village. And that is a source of great pride, both for us as staff and the community as a whole. And as I go through our story, you'll see that kind of enabled us to pin our referendum request into something really rooted in something real. After a 1985 referendum, our library doubled in size, but the bones of it are still very much here today. So in 2018, we found ourselves in a predicament that I think a lot of libraries find themselves in. When we added on in 1985, the edition focused on adult materials. I think at that time we were really thinking about adults as our primary users of the library. Youth services was down in a basement that didn't really get a whole lot of love. We spent a lot of time ensuring that the upstairs of our library kind of reflected the history of the rest of it. And then downstairs just kind of was a basement. We used to call it like grandma's basement. But over time, youth services had taken up the entire lower level, and no updates had really been done since 1986. So we found ourselves with a space that didn't meet our current purposes. We had overcrowding. We had failing infrastructure. You can see from these pictures, we rest right near elementary schools, high school, and middle school, and get about up to 100 students in non-pandemic times after school every day, all on top of each other, all loud, all having fun, all sound bouncing all over the library. So what was our solution? The solution really ended up being a complete renovation of the lower level of our library. So our upper level, unlike a lot of buildings, is our main entry level. You go downstairs to youth services. We decided there was no real way to take the space we had and just change it. We needed to rebuild it. So in 2013, that effort began, and the estimated price tag was $1.5 million. So initially, when we started thinking, hey, we've got to get money for this, our board was fundamentally opposed to going to referendum. They were very, very, very interested in and believed we could raise this money through fundraising. And we tried all of it. Capital campaign mailings, we did fundraisers, we went to local groups for grants. We raised $217,000, which was great. And it enabled us to do our first portion of our project, which was early learner space for our littlest patrons. But realistically, fundraising at that rate, it would have taken us 15 to 20 years to get the $1.5 million that we would have needed. So we decided the time was right. We needed to go to referendum and find out if the community wanted us to make this change or not. So the first step is kind of a first step that you're all taking today, which is to talk to John at EveryLibrary. We are lucky enough that John is actually our neighbor to the east, just a touch. And he was able to meet with us pretty much right away because we're library people. We aren't attorneys. We aren't political savvy people all the time. And we had no idea where to begin. So with John, we started our to-do list. And the primary items on that to-do list were really to hone and develop a message and then create marketing materials around it, find people to support it, and get them engaged. Our biggest item on our not to-do list was to make sure we weren't using our time or funds for direct campaigning. So develop focused message is a really nice thing. And it sounds maybe easy, 3 short questions, right? What's the problem? What's the solution? And how do we get people to support us? But what we found was developing that was really, really challenging. And that's kind of where our marketing materials and the development of them became so critical. We're a small library. We have a staff of 26. And that is largely, as I think for most of us, part-time staff. We don't have a marketing department. I don't have a marketing background. Library Aware became our essential starting place. So we learned from John that he had helped create templates, and those became our jumping off point. They didn't just guide us from a look and feel perspective, they forced us to make content considerations. So I have a template in front of me. It's going to tell me not just kinds of things I need, but really how much I need to write. It forced us to hone our message into space. And then kind of on top of that, we got unique branding, we got widgets, we were able to use all of that to merge together into our full informational program. So this is a little piece of what we did. We did a variety of kind of versions of this information, but this is the one that kind of pulled everything in. So this was a poster. This was a poster that hung inside the library. It is rooted in information about the referendum only. There is no campaigning in this poster. So our first section really was the what and the why. Here's how much space we had. Maximum information, fewest words possible. Our second section is something that I know John is going to talk a lot about because it was probably the most important lesson that we learned from him in our process. Was we needed to think not just about what we wanted to do and what benefit it would be, but we needed to think about the reality of what would happen if we failed. And we needed to really outline that for our voters. Not just what are you getting, but what will happen if you say, you know what, that is a bigger investment than I can make. Real benefits, real risks, short language, precise language, and effective language. And those effective terms, things like improve community access, modernization, inefficient, critical, reduced access, keywords that stick in a brain to make people realize I'm getting something, but I might also miss something. Our third section, frequently asked questions. We identified 3 questions that we thought every single person would ask, whether or not they were a supporter of the library or not. It's the questions that all of us ask when somebody wants money. What is this change? What is your budget and why can't you cover it yourself? And how much is it going to cost me at the end of the day? All of these questions, all of this information we presented had one purpose, which was making sure that our message was clear and honest and precise. All right. We also were very lucky. We had a board member who had a background in public relations. I'm not going to play these for you, if only because then I have to watch myself on video on screen in 2 locations. But I believe that they will be posted in the chat. We created videos, marketing videos. Everyone doesn't come to our library. A lot of people have no idea what a busy library looks like after school. So we forced them to see it. We videotaped what it looks like on an average day. We videotaped a tour of the space and what was wrong with it. And we posted those all over social media to get people engaged. So what did we learn? We learned a lot of things. We learned that you need to be as honest as possible about what you are trying to do so people trust that the information that you are giving them is real and accurate. We learned that we had to focus our message on one single central point. And I know John's going to talk about this more in earnest. For us, we focused on pride. Our community is a community that takes great pride in its history. It takes great pride in who we are, both in terms of what we offer to each other and in terms of what other people look to us for. Our community deserved more than what we were able to give them without the change we wanted to make. We recognize the value of letting people know what is going to happen if you say no, because the library still has to be here and things are going to have to change. And the last piece of lesson in here, we're not allowed to campaign, but you can always sell your vision. The goal of the referendum is to, that was a start of a sentence. And that was a start of a sentence for everyone who asked. But the answer to the end of that sentence varied depending on who was asking. For some people, the goal of the referendum is to make a great space for your team to come after school. For some people, oh, my lights are going to go off. There we go. I knew it was going to happen. For some people, the goal of the referendum is to make sure that their housing dollars are worth it, make sure that their house value stays up. We learned that we needed to focus on what made us unique and special and hit that really hard. But we also learned that we had to control our message. I've popped up this little comment we got on Facebook back in the days. So this would have been about a year ago. I'm not going to read through the whole thing, but it's a comment that I think as library people, we've all heard before. Why can't the library just get a corporate partner? Make your own money. You don't need my tax dollars. People who just fundamentally don't believe in the mission of a library as a tax-funded support. There are a lot of people that you are never going to convince. And as long as you stay on your message and don't get sidetracked, you'll be fine. We would not engage in social media. We made that mistake once in this very post. It drove us off our message and it got us off track. We learned that lesson quickly. Let stakeholders, let yes campaign members in the community carry your banner for you. And you just keep focusing on, here is what we need, and here is what the referendum is intended to do. So how did Library Aware help us? Well, I think that the biggest thing that we got was not only from a design perspective, but as I said, from a content perspective. It forced us to think about our focused approach. It forced us to think about the types of information that we needed to supply to people. And we had no idea about any of that when we started. Because they were easy, it gave us the opportunity to really focus less of our time on what things looked like and more of our time on what things said. And ultimately, that is where 80% of your effort should always be. So we're almost done with our project. We've started moving books into our new shelves. I'm in this fancy new office with nothing on the walls yet. And it's been really a great success for us. We were really lucky, frankly, to go to referendum on March 20th, right, at the beginning of this. And we've been able to be closed while so much of the world is closed, but it's going to be a fantastic space and we're really excited about it. And I really appreciate you listening to the story of our tiny library and our tiny little village out here in Illinois.
Well, thank you for sharing it, Diane. And if anyone has questions for Diane, you can go ahead and put them into the chat. I don't know if you saw, but Darla Chambliss says your building is beautiful, and I absolutely agree. I have a question for you.
Sure.
How did you get your staff involved in the information-only part of your campaign? And I'm asking this because I used to work in a library. We had a referendum. Staff were really nervous about even an information only campaign because they were very afraid of crossing that campaigning line. So I'm curious about how you prepared your staff for helping the community to understand what it was and what your vision was.
Yeah, I think that's the scariest thing for all of us is understanding those lines, particularly because they are legal lines. They're not just moral lines, they are legal lines. For us, I think the biggest thing that we did was kind of create packets of information for people. So we really kind of let people know these are the questions that you might get, and these are the answers you're allowed to provide. So we had like an in-house frequently asked questions, script, as it were, just so people would know where those lines were.
That's a great idea. And I have a couple of questions now from the chat. Terry Lombardi wants to know, can you say more on the learnings from social media? I assume that probably means like the do's and don'ts of talking about this on social media.
We didn't. We stopped after that first one. So there are a few problems with it. One, we had board members who were on there. And once you get more than a certain number of board members on the same chat, you are violating Open Meetings Act. So you have to be really, really careful. But also we didn't, after that first engagement, we didn't engage because it was too hard to draw the line between what was a campaign and what was information. So when conversations were happening, we did not post on them. So our messaging on social media was, hey, there's a vote coming up, or hey, here's some more information, or hey, would you like to see this video of what after school looks like? But it was never really, hey, this is why we think you should vote yes. It was all very much, here's the problem that we're having. If you'd like to learn more about the referendum, here's a website you can go to. And it always ended with that. If you want to learn more about it, here's a website you can go to.
That's a great tactic. And then Emily David asks, can you talk about identifying and recruiting your super supporters to help carry the banner?
Yeah, absolutely. So we, again, small community, we sat down in a room and we listed probably maybe 100 people that we identified as, we'll call them movers and shakers in the community. PTO, real estate, business owners, government officials, committee members, not necessarily like heads of government, but commissions that were, important to us, local volunteer organizations. And we divided up those people and we spoke to them. We went to them with information and we said, hey, this is what's happening. What do you think the pitfalls are? And what do you, based on the people you know, what do you think the pitfalls are? Do you think this would work? Do you think this would pass? And that gave us a couple of different things. It gave us people who understood what we were doing so they could carry the banner for us. But it also gave us more information about our message, because I hadn't really even been thinking about the library in terms of real estate value until I talked to a realtor. And she was like, absolutely. People go to the schools and they walk in the library. And that's how they determine if they want to buy a house in a community like ours. And if our library looks like junk, your home values go down. It was a point I hadn't even thought of. So it was it was kind of a two-sided benefit where we got them to be the people who are out there working for us. And we also got the wealth of information that they had.
That's really smart. And I wanted to circle back to what you were saying about effective language, the language that you used in your promotional pieces. How did you get to the point where you knew what language your community would respond to?
Gosh, I don't even know if I have an answer to that. That's a great question. I don't know if I have an answer to that. I think that a lot of times I'm a member of this community. So I live in this town. and I wrote a lot of it. And for the most part, I used words that spoke to me, because I think you know, I'm a person in this community. I have children in this community. My children use this library. I'm the assistant director now, but I started in youth services and then moved to adult services. So I know a lot of our library users. Kind of like I started, where this is a story about your community. Your effective language is based on how well you know your community. And if you don't know your community, the first thing you need to do is find out about your community.
That's a great point. And I was wondering also probably that those meetings that you had with your banner carriers probably also uncovered language that you could use in your marketing, I bet.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, that's all for right now for the questions in the chat, but Diane is going to be here for the rest of the webinar. So if you think of other things that you want to ask her, go ahead and put them into the chat. But right now we're going to move on and bring in John Kratzka from EveryLibrary, who is going to share practical tips for really letting your community know why they should support your ballot measure. John.
Hi, Angela. Thanks very much to the team here at Library Aware. I want to appreciate what they do every day and the partnership that we have here at EveryLibrary to help advance these conversations, and also to thank Diane for her time on this presentation, as well as her partnership when we were working with the Riverside Public Library on their campaign last year. As the next slide shows, there's two components to our work here at EveryLibrary and the EveryLibrary Institute. EveryLibrary itself is our 501c4 political action committee. We're set up in order to raise money and to expend money on support for libraries when they're on the ballot, when there's a negotiation, say, between a city council, county government, a town board. We also have a whole portfolio that works on school library initiatives, support for state library associations, other national issues of concern for libraries. We do all of that work as a 501c4 in order to do two things. One is to protect the library itself when they're on the ballot from the accusation. Sorry, forgive me. We do all of our work as a 501c4 pro bono, for free, all the time, in order to help the library, protect the library from the accusation that they're using public money to advance the outcome of the campaign. It's part of that neutrality that Diane was talking about that libraries have to be. You can't advocate for the outcome, but you can talk a lot about what's going to happen if it passes and what happens if it fails. So we're pro bono in order to do that. But we're also pro bono because we don't want you, if we're working with you closely like we do with the team in Riverside, Illinois, as well as 114 other communities, we don't want you thinking that we're making recommendations based on us as a consultant, as a paid consultant. We're in it as a pro bono partner, so that, you know, we care very much about what's on the yard sign. We don't really care who prints it. The other part of our work is as a C3. It's the EveryLibrary Institute. It's our nonprofit public policy, tax policy think tank. We talk a lot about, well, it's almost like public health on the think tank side and medical on the C4 side, if that makes any sense. We can outlaw smoking, or we can work on one patient at a time, but we're in it to help libraries win the funding they need in order to succeed. I bring up both organizations because, as Diane said, I live just down the street. That's where our C3, the EveryLibrary Institute, is located, here in my home office, as it were. And then here's the other thing. Our C4, EveryLibrary, is, well, our legal address is in Riverside, Illinois. Back in 2012, when we first got EveryLibrary started, I thought to myself, well, the post office is right across from the grocery store I like going to, so why don't we put it there? And and then when Diane and her team were going to the ballot, and they reached out and said, hey, we need some help, I thought to myself, well, I got 114 other libraries that we're strangers at. I got to show up to EveryLibrary's hometown library in a particular way. It's not why we had such a good collaboration. We have good collaborations all across the country. But my God, what am I going to do? It's my hometown library. I got to lean in. All right. So what we want to talk about for this half of our conversation is not the specifics of Riverside, but the general approach that can help you if you're going to the ballot, if you're starting to think through being on the ballot, or even if you're working on a negotiation, some of the general framework around that very specific messaging that Diane was talking about. There are 4 different ways that the person that you're talking to, the voter, the constituent of your elected officials, even your donors, are wired to listen about the library. And I want to bring this up because the messaging that you need to make as tight as Diane did, the messaging is going to resonate with people in 4 key but distinct ways. There are folks who are compassionately engaged. They're compassionately engaged about what the library is doing. You, as a librarian or library worker, are in a certain respect a proxy for their compassion. You do the thing that they want to see done in the world, but they don't want to do it themselves. Otherwise, they would have gone to library school. The work that you do with a particular population or for a group of people is really important to folks. It's probably the easiest story that we can tell in library advocacy because, or in library communications at all, because it's the one that we're most comfortable with and we've been telling the longest. Here's how story time helps a child learn to read so that child can then read to learn. There's a compassion there that's very powerful and should not be ignored in the communications that you have about why you're going on the ballot. Because there's a certain group of people who say, yes, I share that same concern, even if I'm not a user myself. Then there's a whole other group of people who are very interested in hearing about, well, they're more invested civically. Perhaps pride of place is the best way to put it. It's not that they don't like people, that they don't care about particular populations, but it might not be their primary concern. They might be more supportive of or focused on an interesting place to live. So they need to hear about your programming or a thriving place to live. And they need to hear about how you fit in an education, cultural, human interest matrix or a more prosperous place to live. When it comes to the business supports that you provide, supports for entrepreneurs, the renewal of your space that makes for a pride of place. And these are not disconnected from each other, but they are certainly dominant in different ways. And if the truth of your ballot measure is that you will improve the quality of life, and not just for particular populations, but for that whole lean in on interesting places to live, thriving places to live, prosperous places to live, you need a message deck that resonates with those kinds of folks. There are other people in your community, and the proportions are not 25, 25, 25, 25 on this, but there are people in the community who are decision makers who are actually very much about data. The story about story time, the one kid who learned how to read, I mean, storytelling for these people is not the primary access point to why their heart, their head, or their gut gets engaged about your ballot measure. They are, in a certain respect, the sports fan, and I'm not suggesting every sports fan's like this, but the hardcore sports fan, the person who's up until 2 o'clock in the morning watching ESPN 1, 2, and 3, who watched ESPN all through the pandemic, even though there was no sports, they are focused first on the statistics. They're focused first on the stats about that team. I don't do sports myself, so I'm going off my memory here. RBIs, home runs, ERA. There's different percentages that these folks care about. In fact, when they go up the next morning after staying up until 2 o'clock watching ESPN, they'll get the newspaper, they'll open up the newspaper, they'll check the box scores to make sure that they got it right, and then they will turn the page. They will turn the page to read about the team. They'll read about the star player who's on a streak or maybe in a slump. They'll read about the management. What's the front office feeling like this week? What's the manager doing to change the lineup? All those different aspects of how the team is playing, the heroes' stories, the villain stories, are first intermediated by the statistics. It's the same thing for the library project. There are certain people who want to look at a spreadsheet, who want to know what the outcomes are, what the inputs were, what the outputs were, and what the outcomes were before they're ever going to listen to how you helped a kid learn how to read. For them, storytelling is dead unless you have the right kind of filter. And that right kind of filter is, why do you need the money? What are you trying to do with the money? Where's it going to go? Then they want to hear about your team, the library team. How are you going to do it better? Are you on a streak? Are you on a slump? Is this project going to be like the new home field advantage for the community? There's a fourth group of people very much in a COVID era. This fourth group of people is not always around, but it tends to be present in a community's heart or their head or their gut after a disaster or during some sort of a problem situation. We work in a lot of communities where there is some sort of an after effect of a problem, like New Orleans after Katrina, where we are very aware that there are people who are aligned not purely on compassion or pride or not just filtering through data, but they have a deep level of concern. or fear. And that fear and that concern is legitimate and needs to be acknowledged. It needs to be not more than just lip service acknowledged. It needs to be engaged, because there are people who, during COVID, coming out of COVID, who are concerned or fearful and who could look to the library as a solution for some of those concerns, as ways to ameliorate fear and pivot us towards some hope for the community that we both love, the people we both care about. It is important in this kind of disaster-ish era that we're in right now to lean in on those facts, because a library-shaped solution, whether it's a building or programs or collections or services that's enacted by librarians and library workers, is something that those folks might not have necessarily seen, not just from a first responder perspective, but from a ecosystem building perspective. They are looking to you to help fill in the gaps that they have identified, but the project that you're bringing to the ballot, or the negotiation that you're trying to have with your funding partners, or the ask that you're making to your donors needs to be true in order for it to resonate. Next slide, please. There are two stories, though, that you tell to any of these four types of people. The two stories that you tell, well, forgive me, there's one story, there are two types of stories. There's only one story at a time, and it has to be true. There's a story of success that, if it's true, is the reason that you're going to the ballot, the reason that you're asking for new money. It's stories of success that demonstrate that you're competent and deserving of additional funding, because you will be able to either replicate or scale the solution that you're already delivering. We have done Storytime very, very well. Additional funding would mean that we can go from 30 kids to 50 kids, and we know that if we can get from here to there, we will be able to compassionately engage, pride of place, data-driven, fix the big problem around the COVID slide for those kids. But the story of success has to be something that says we are competent at our jobs as librarians and library workers, and that the investment is going to go to either replicate our success or scale our success. The other story that you could tell, if it's true, has to be told with all honesty, that there's a story of failure sometimes. The reason that we go to the ballot is not just to extend our success. Sometimes it's to fix failure. It's to turn around things that are not working right now. Stories of failure that demonstrate your integrity means that you're fundable. Your integrity means that you're fundable. Your competencies certainly do as well, but the integrity that you have to say, we have identified as library leaders a problem in our ability to deliver on our compassion, a shortfall in our ability to build place, a situation where the numbers don't line up with our mission, vision, and values. And that if we don't do something about this, the COVID era problems are going to continue to persist, and we are not, well, the failure offends us. If it offends you as well, please stand with us when it comes to new funding, going to the ballot, donor support. One of those two stories is true, and voters will honestly see through it if you're trying to spin it the other way. There's a little bit more to take a look at on the next slide around where you have to be positioning this. Diane did a beautiful job of talking about it for Riverside, that there are two columns on any informational communications campaign. And there's one thing that a Vote Yes committee endorses. There are two columns. It's Plan A, what happens if the project is funded? There's Plan B, what happens if it's not? And the reason that you do a Plan A, Plan B conversation is threefold. One is that, well, it's one of two things happens on election day. It's either funded or it's not. It passes or it fails. Number two is the open and the transparent and the consultative nature of your planning process needs to be very much about disclosing to the public, not just, like Diane said, your hopes, but your identified concerns. That if Plan A happens, we will do X, Y, and Z in order to make this realized. If Plan A doesn't happen, our Plan B isn't breaking faith with the community. We're still going to be the best library we can be, except we have at least one, possibly two financial arms tied behind our back. And then, folks, if it turns out that you pass it, you got to do Plan A. But if you don't, you got to do Plan B. The third reason that you do this is that there are, Plan A resonates with people who are, well, believers in the library. And Plan B The truthful discussion of what happens if this thing fails resonates with people who are, well, they're not necessarily suspicious of the library, but they're suspicious of taxes in general and other government projects and bureaucrats. And how do you distinguish the librarians and the library workers from the tax man? It's telling them the truth about what happens if we don't. Certain communities in this country have made decisions based on a very clear proffer of information to say, no, we're going to vote it down. That's their right. It might be disappointing to us as the library leadership team, but the plan A part of it, where a yes committee comes in, they say this is the imagined future that we want. And then they also are cautioning against that plan B together. Whichever story is true, folks. Whichever story is true, and then stick to it. Stories of competency, stories of success, your measures of success are the justifications that you can bring to the voters that make you eligible for funding when it's a true story. Likewise, in a tough budget climate, when I say budget here, I don't mean just for the library, I mean for your community perhaps. Coming out of COVID, it's important to root your truths in failure, not in a way that says, oh, poor us, but in a way that says, how do we together, with the right kind of funding or the form of the building that allows us to function properly as a library, how do we together realize our mission, further our vision, and express our values properly? There are folks out there who want to see failure corrected. Tell them the truth about how it's going to happen. And like Diane said, you got to spend a little bit of money to make it happen. The reason that we were so proud to partner with Library Aware on all of these tools for informational communications campaigns is because it does make it easy for folks who don't have a marketing department themselves to get going. And to put the thoughtful process around, well, those 4 types of people who listen in different ways, the 2 possible messages that, well, one's failure, one's success, and then the plan A, plan B framework that activates people's hearts, heads, and guts, you got to put a little bit of work into it and a little bit of activity financial activity behind it. Usually, we are marketing tomorrow in libraries. And I appreciate that very much. I mean, if you're going to put on a story time at 10 a.m. Thursday, bring your kids are going to learn X, Y, and Z, and Miss Nancy, the librarian, is going to be a fantastic partner with you as a parent in first language literacy, and your kids are going to love it. Well, marketing tomorrow, no offense, there's only a certain number of families that are going to have kids of the right age who are available at the right time on Thursday. Now, Miss Nancy's fantastic. She'll do it again next week. But there's only a certain inventory of people who are going to be able to come to your program. And yet there are a lot of humans in your community who want to hear about extending that success. Or maybe Miss Nancy, we don't have enough of Miss Nancy. We don't have enough room in our building. We don't have the right form that allows us to function, either from our budget or from our buildings. Those folks who are never going to come to Storytime, they're never going to come to a program and learning how to use Excel to write their business plan or to even get a job. They don't need it. They're not eligible for it. They do want to hear, though, about how you did it yesterday for somebody else. They need to hear marketing from you about how you did that thing, not just tomorrow, come to our program, but what did we do yesterday? There were 30 kids there. 30 kids who learned how to begin to learn how to read so they could then read to learn. 30 kids, well, we want to do that again with a different age group. We want to extend that program in some way, shape, or form. Or we should have had 50, and we're short right now. The people who are compassionately engaged will hear what you've done and say, yes. The people who are pride of place oriented will hear what you have done already and would like to either see that replicated and extended or fixed if it's a problem. The people who have data on their hearts first as the gateway, they weren't going to come to your program tomorrow anyway. They wanted to know where the money went, and they also are interested in hearing about who's spending it. You got to spend some money, folks, in the lead up to a ballot measure campaign, just talking about yourselves, talking about your competencies, and identifying what the problems are, talking about your hopes, addressing the concerns in the community, and honestly rooting yourself in that pride of place and that hope and compassion for the other. The biggest thing that we can do is to take some of these tools that we have in place and put them out there with enough resource behind it to break through some of that noise. There's a lot of people who care. There's a lot. I've been using Storytime a bunch because it's easy. But there are a lot of other issues that your library ballot measure could be addressing in the plan of service, or your building initiative could be addressing in that building plan. We have to talk with a full voice, as Diane said, across many different components of society, because the multi-purpose nature of a library project, a building project, the multi-impactors that you have for library collection, program services, and staffing matter across many different parts of society. This is never a one-size-fits-all. There are multiple versions of the fact sheet. There are multiple brochures. There's a few different signs that are hanging up in different places around the community. And yet these points of intersection between organizations, agencies, stakeholder groups, the outreach to them early in the process to be able to say, we have a plan coming together for the library. We wonder what you think about it. We could use your help, is the place to find those real leaders who can help, well, to Emily's point earlier about carrying the banner. Finally, ballot measures, negotiations with funding partners like city councils, county governments, town boards. That's all well and good. I just want to mention one thing real quick, that this sort of framework also works well with donors. If you are looking to do a public-private partnership kind of approach, you can do fundraising in order to help bring in some funding support from philanthropy or small donors or major gifts in order to augment what you're doing on the ballot, great. If you're looking just to run a campaign throughout the year in order to build support for the library from small donors or major gifts, great. People are interested in giving good money, whether it's tax money or their own treasure. Folks are interested in making sure that the good money goes to either, well, extend success or fix failure. That the programs and projects are justified by the data that says we are going to move this community forward, we're going to fix failure, we're going to extend success, and not just those kinds of stories. These are people who are looking, the same way a taxpayer is, for a small amount of smart money to go to solutions that are, well, library shaped. I wish you a lot of luck, folks, if you're going to the ballot. I want to invite you to work with us if we can be of help to you. We do a lot of calls here at EveryLibrary. I can be reached in a lot of different ways. EveryLibrary.org, info at EveryLibrary, online, on social, or on Twitter like that. We do all of our work because of donors like Library Aware and EBSCO and NoveList. We do all of our work pro bono and for free. If it's just one phone call you want to have to see whether or not you're on the right path, great. Be happy to help you think it through. If it's a larger situation and you might be running into some more challenges, or if you want to partner in it to win it, we'd be very happy to help, like we did in Riverside Public Library, EveryLibrary's hometown. So, Angela, thanks very much.
Thank you, John. That was excellent advice. And we have time for questions. So if anyone in the audience has a question for John or Diane, go ahead and type it into the chat and be sure you choose everyone from the drop-down menu. I actually have a question for you. I'm curious, from your experience so far, what kind of impact do you think the pandemic has had on your understanding of how marketing messages are going to land with communities and what libraries should be saying?
Sure. The reason I bring up the COVID informed, the concerns and the fears, is not to go negative, but to be honest about where hope can come from. Some communities have been impacted more than others. We're working in a few places right now where COVID, while it's important, is not the key driver. Their new normal, their next normal, is a lot different than it is here in suburban Chicago, where Diane and I are. The particulars of place and the understanding of how people are feeling coming through COVID should drive your messaging. There's no toolkit there's never been a toolkit available for doing a ballot measure. The toolkit doesn't work. It's active listening. It's asking people how do you feel? How do you actually feel about where the community's heading? There will be campaigns for libraries coming through COVID that will stumble. And I think that, my estimation about why they're going to stumble is not because it's a bad idea for the library, or for the community, I should say, but it's because the priority for the community is not necessarily library shaped first. They might have to not get in line. They might have to do one of two things. One is to understand if their library-shaped solution to the problems is actually legitimate, and then two, how do you communicate that to folks if it really is? But if the solution that the community needs coming through COVID is not shaped like a library, hold your political powder. Really, seriously, hold your political powder, and be honest with yourselves about when. But that takes a lot of active listening, and we can help with that, Angela. We can certainly help with that.
Excellent, excellent. And then circling back to the story of yesterday, I'm curious what you would recommend to a library. What kind of things should they be talking about now in their marketing if they don't anticipate that there's going to be a referendum or ballot soon? But I always feel like everybody should always be softening the ground for that possibility. Do you have some suggestions for folks on that end?
Sure. Marketing yesterday is marketing the value system of the library. So if your primary work is with young children, great, market the value system. If it's with people looking for work, fantastic, market that value system. If it's about reading for joy or pleasure, market that. It's the truth of what the library is up to, plus the aspirations. So that we had perhaps a new program yesterday. Here's how it went. Here's how it could go. We had a new idea. We had a new approach yesterday, and maybe that new approach was some of the pivot during COVID around digital or online or virtual. Some of it might be getting back to normal on how we would like to see things go when we're comfortable again in person and allowed to be in person again. Some of it might be really focused on the next. But to market yesterday is to share where the value system of the library is being expressed with a small amount of tax dollars for maximum impact.
Very good. I was looking through the chat questions. One of our audience members wonders if you have some advice. It sounds like someone from their county believes that a library shouldn't even be doing an information-only campaign. So can you provide some advice on how to talk to officials who maybe are not as well versed in what the actual legal ramifications are?
I'm going to say this really honestly to you. If your county attorney is not interested in you speaking about the measure at all, you might be stuck. The second opinion that I can offer is not legal advice here, but it's practical advice that the library board is developing Plan A. That's what's going to the ballot. It might be to save the library budget. It might be to extend the library budget. It might be to remodel a building that's crumbling around your ears or build the first new thing since Carnegie died. Plan A is the work of the board, as is Plan B. What happens if it doesn't pass? How do we keep going as a library? How do we keep working? How do we shoehorn the library into a building? Like our dear friends in Crystal Lake, Illinois, they had Project Shoehorn. When the thing didn't pass for them, they had to shoehorn the library of the 21st century into a building from the 1950s. That Plan B is equally as important to communicate, and that's the argument that I would make. And if it's a Plan B that's been ratified by the board, then it is equally legitimate to communicate. So while we've had this situation happen around the country where the idea of even whispering that there is something coming on the ballot is not sitting well with the county attorney or the city attorney or the library attorney, I can't contradict that. That's the brief that you have from your legal counsel. But if you want somebody to argue with them, I'd be really happy to. It's one of my hobbies.
That's great. And we have another question from the audience. They were wondering if you have some advice for getting your foundation or friends group involved in the marketing messages of a campaign.
Sure. There's two kinds of money that can come from the foundation of the friends group. There's restricted money and there's unrestricted money. Let me talk about unrestricted money first. The foundation of the friends group can lean in as a 501c3 organization in support of the library's informational communications campaign in an unrestricted way. If the library's budget's a little short on marketing dollars, your friends group, your foundation, can help fund, generally speaking, again, this is always with advice of counsel, but generally speaking, can fund the informational communications campaign, the non-advocacy, no thumb on the scale, Plan A, Plan B, what happens if it passes, what happens if it fails. That work is also important for the foundation board and or the Friends board to potentially endorse, officially endorse, if that's within your charter and bylaws, the actual campaign to say, as a citizen group that's aligned around the future of the library and the funding future of the library, the biggest fundraising day for our library is going to be election day. We endorse this. And then there's restricted money as well, where if the Friends group or the foundation wants to put in some money, generally speaking on the yes campaign side, though we've worked in a few places where there are no campaigns going on, they can do that, but there's always a formula about how much money the foundation or the Friends group and how much activity they can conduct on an advocacy campaign. It's perfectly permissible, but it is capped by the IRS. And again, I'd be happy to help consult on that a little bit. But getting them involved is not just it's not just treasure. It's not just time, it's also their good name.
I have another question, and I'm not sure if this is best answered by you or Diane, so I think either one of you, but Perry Stokes wants to know if you have any particular advice for crafting an effective ballot measure summary. She or he says, I suspect this may be the only message that reaches most voters.
That's an interesting question. Diane, I don't know if you guys had to do that, or was that the Riverside Corporation Council that did that?
Yeah, we did not have to write our actual ballot question. That was done for us.
Yeah, so the ballot summary approach is well, depends on where you are. Let me put a bit of a break in here, because the official ballot summary is usually composed by legal counsel for the library or legal counsel for the community that the library is part of. There are other types of ballot language, though, that happens in some jurisdictions where there's a citizen group or an individual even who could make statements according to state law. And that is often done by the local vote yes committee, or in support or with support from a Friends group or a foundation as well. Though you also see negative ones put out by individuals who are cranky about taxes or opposed, for different reasons. Forgive me, but there's a lot of nuance here about where you are in the country, and I hesitate to say more.
I think that's pretty accurate. And I think this is going to be our final question, but I wanted to squeeze it in. It comes from Jenny Berg, and she says, we're collaborating with Parks and Rec to put a bond on the ballot for multiple buildings, a library, an aquatic center, and a recreation center. I've heard this is sometimes a more likely way of passing a bond. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, quite frankly, it depends on what your voters feel like. There's no conventional wisdom in library elections. I really would like to dispel every bit of library conventional wisdom. We actually just released a report at EveryLibrary that took a look at the last 15 years of library ballot measures. There's 750 that we were able to identify the characteristics of the community, the heuristics of the community as well. Like what else was on the ballot, what was the tax rate in the community, what was the what's the use rate for the library. All these different points of conventional wisdom are pretty much popped like a balloon when you go back and do a significant regression analysis of what's on the ballot. It's called Factors of Success. You can get it at the EveryLibrary Institute page. But if you don't listen to your own community, you have no idea whether or not they like a multi-purpose approach, if they like a lower ticket amount in general for each component, but a bigger ticket amount and just get it done. Like, you got to get in there and listen to what people want, and not just from a user perspective, but from a value system perspective. The people who are going to drive by the current library, the current aquatic center, the fact that there isn't a rec center right now, and they think everything's just fine, you got to dial in on what they believe, what their hopes are, what their concerns are, where their value system really lies. Otherwise, I mean, honestly, Jenny, there's no conventional wisdom.
All right. Thank you so much for that very insightful answer. And I just want to say thank you again to you, John and Diane, for joining us today for this webinar. I think that I learned a great deal, and I hope that our audience did as well. So thank you for your time. We do appreciate it. And it is time now for us to go to the training portion. If you are a Library Aware customer, we're going to show you how to use some of the templates that we have in Library Aware to create some of the promotional items using insights from John and from Diane. So I'm going to dive right into that by getting into Library Aware. And I accidentally logged out, but that's all right. We're in the homepage of Library Aware. And to find all of the templates that we have for ballot initiatives or any kind of open-ended campaign informational campaign for your library using any of the advice that you got today, you're just going to type the word advocacy into the Library Aware homepage search bar, and you'll come up with a bunch of different templates. There are lots of different formats, and because we have about 41 templates for advocacy, it might be easier for you if you went ahead and looked over here on the left side to refine by the format of whatever type of promotional material that you wanted to create. So we have all kinds of things: bookmarks, e-blasts, flyers and signs, widgets. We're going to look at some of those during today's training. I wanted to start out first by showing you this. This is, if I hit preview, you're going to be able to see a preview of this particular flyer. It mimics what you saw in Diane's presentation, lays out what will happen if your referendum passes and what will happen if it fails. And I'm going to pretend for the moment that this is something that I want to work with. So I'm just going to click on the blue Create button to open it up here in Library Aware. Everything within Library Aware is created so that you can focus on the message and not so much on the design, as Diane said, but it's also customizable. So we know that there are a lot of libraries with branding guidelines, and you may have colors and fonts that you want to use so that people will recognize that this particular piece is coming from your library. You can make all of those customizations within Library Aware. It's pretty darn easy. So let's say, for instance, that I wanted to change the background color on this portion, and if it passes and I had some branding color, I can just click on this and then go up here to the paint can. Maybe I have a hex code that's part of my branding guidelines that I can drop in right here, or I can just use the slider, or I can move this little guy around and pick a color that will be something close to what my library uses and will be recognized by my community as coming from the library. Once you get your color set where you'd like it, you just kind of double click outside here, and you'll see that my color changed from that wonderful teal kind of color to this purple, which is not super beautiful, but it serves a purpose. All of the text within these Library Aware templates is also customizable, and we do give you some prompts in here. So like Diane said, you can start to think about what is it that I want to say in my marketing material and go ahead and create these as quickly as possible. There's a backside to this particular one. I know two-sided flyers are really popular with a lot of our library customers, so you can come to the back here and add some more text. This area is kind of, I was thinking about how to play with this. If you had a stakeholder who was had a particular statement about how the library had impacted their life, maybe it's one of those parents who took their child to a story time and something significant in literacy happened and their child learned to read, or their child learned a new skill, you could get a quote from that stakeholder or that person who is going to carry the banner for you and put it right here instead of this text. And then you can actually also change the image inside of this flyer and all of the Library Aware flyers and templates just by clicking on it and then clicking on this swap image icon up here. This pulls up the Library Aware image selector where we have lots and lots of stock photos that are included in your Library Aware subscription, so you don't have to worry about copyright. So you could search for stock photos if you wanted to. I'm going to do child reading. Or you could, down here, you'll see on the bottom, kind of in the middle, you could select an image from your computer and upload it. So maybe you have a photo of that mom whose child's life was changed during the story time. You could upload that to Library Aware and use that in your flyer here. I'm just gonna pick, just pick one. And you'll see that I picked by clicking select this image, and now this is changed to the photograph of the child and looks like the teacher. I'm going to get asked if I really want to accept this photo, and I'm going to say yes. And so I have now customized my flyer. You can add a website here. Maybe you have a separate website for the campaign, or you have a phone number or someplace people can email to ask questions. You can put that down here, and then you would just save this in your folders as an item. And you can go ahead and post it to social media if you want, or you could print it by clicking on the printer icon here and go ahead and start handing these out to people. So it's really super easy. Let's go back to the LibraryAware homepage. I wanted to show you e-blasts because one of the great things that you can do in an information-only campaign is to let your community know that what the impact of this particular ballot initiative would be and where they can go to vote. So we have a couple of e-blast templates here for you, and I'm going to open this one. There's even one here for if you win, then you get to thank your cardholders for their support. In the editor for the e-blast, again, everything is customizable, text, images. We've kind of tried to lay this out to give you some prompts so you can create a message that's really effective and resonates with your particular community. So again, you can change all of the photographs here if you like. You can change the text. If you want to talk about more than just 3 things, you can always add a section to an e-blast, and you can make this as long as you like. To add a section to an e-blast, if you've never done that, you just kind of click anywhere on the e-blast template and then click Add New. I want to imitate what I see here, so I've got 3 images and 3 pieces of text underneath it. So the first thing I'm going to do is put in a text area, 3 columns. So here's my text, and then I want to put above it some images. Well, maybe I just want to put text in. So you can put the text in here and you can say whatever you like. Direct people to a landing page, have people, again, email you if you like. It's all customizable. You can put your library's URL down here again, or your email address if you have an email for somebody to send questions about it. You can change this header if you have a header that you would prefer to use. And again, you could save this, and then you're going to upload your cardholders as a subscriber interest group to LibraryAware if you haven't done that already. It's really easy to do. You just click up here on the subscribers tab, and it's asking me that because I didn't save my e-blast. And then you're going to click on add, probably bulk subscribers, because I bet you have a bunch of cardholders that you want to send this email to. And then you would upload your subscribers in a CSV file. All you need is their email address, first name and last name. And in about 24 hours, our third-party verification system will make sure that all of those emails are legitimate, and you'll be able to send this out to your cardholders. Email is really an effective way to communicate with your cardholders about your with your general information campaign, and to make sure they know. You can even put in where they can vote. If you're living in a small community and you know where the polls are going to be, maybe you want to add in some information about registration or early voting locations. You can do all of that through an email. I'm going to head back to the LibraryAware homepage because we want to talk a little bit about how to reach our cardholders and potential voters who are in neighborhoods that are not digitally connected. So we've created these door hangers that I'm going to just open up so I can show it to you. And you can, again, customize this to whatever you want to say in your general information campaign. Save it as an item, and then if you want to, if you have that marketing budget that John talked about, you can actually send this file off to a printer and have them printed on some nice cardstock paper. They can actually, you can have them cut this part out. And then I know of a lot of libraries that use volunteers to take these door hangers out to communities and just hang them on folks' doors. This is something that your staff could do off hours if they wanted to. It's just a really great way to let people in those particular neighborhoods know that there's some things at stake if their ballot initiative isn't passed, and to get that information out about your ballot initiative or your referendum. So going back to the home page again, we're on advocacy. We want to talk a little bit about how to get people to speak up for your library. And I know one of the questions in the chat was, how do we find the people who can carry the banner for us? And one of the things you can do is start soliciting sometimes people to talk about their library experience and maybe how your library has changed their lives. A great way to do that is with an infographic. So I'm just going to type advocacy infographics here. We have a whole bunch of them for a variety of different subjects. We have some that are related to voting and ballot initiatives here, and then infographics for other things like how your library impacts Summer Slide, what you can do with the library card. This can be repurposed for an advocacy. Maybe you want to talk about all of the things that your library does, so you can use this year in review infographic. I'll just pull it up as a preview so you can see it. We have lots of stats in here, and they're presented in a visually pleasing way, so you can talk about the things that your library is doing, how they're changing the community in a way that is going to not just be a bunch of statistics, but people will really be able to process that information much more if you do it in a visual context. So I want to go back to this particular advocacy infographic. You can see here, this is a great way to tell people what your library is doing and how they're changing the community. Again, this falls under general information, and you can use this on social media. You could put this on your website. You can send this out to people. Maybe you've come up with a list like Diane did of people that you think might be willing to speak up about your ballot issue or referendum. You could send them this infographic just as kind of a way to like introduce what's going on with the issue or ballot initiative from your library, and ask them to advocate for you, to give you testimonials, maybe to write something to the local newspaper, all of those things. This can be the gateway to get that conversation started. So infographics are a really great way to communicate all of the things that your library does in a way that's visually pleasing. One thing to know as you're working through all of your marketing materials, and you can see we have lots more. I'm just going to go back to being advocacy. You can create signs and flyers. Here's one I want to point out to you because I think it's really important as you start to think about putting a ballot initiative on or putting it together, to think about making sure that your community knows to register first, because you may have people who would support your library, but they are not registered voters yet. So you want to tell them, here's where you can register to vote. Here's the deadline to vote. Here's when you can go vote early if that's available in your community, or if people can do absentee ballot, where they can drop those off at. Those are things that you can communicate to people without crossing that line in campaigning. And this particular flyer works really well for that purpose. So you can put all of that information in here, and then as we get closer to election day, you could repurpose this flyer and put in polling locations, maybe the website for the Board of Elections. All of those things fall under your general information campaign, and you can use this flyer to communicate that with your community. One of the lovely things about Library Aware is if you get stuck at any point doing any of these templates and you need help, and you see down here in the very bottom left-hand corner, it says stuck, chat with us. We have a chat service with real people who can help you solve problems with templates, maybe help you figure out how to move an image around if you're having a little bit of difficulty, or how to move some text around. So that can be really helpful, especially if you're on a deadline. Or down here in the bottom right, you can email us if you're doing something that you're not on deadline and you can wait a little longer for a resolution on. You can always send us an email. Maybe you want to send us your list of cardholders and let us upload them to your account. That's totally something that we can help you with. So down here in help and support, if you just click on that, you can send us an email very easily. If you by chance are not a Library Aware customer, but you've been watching this training and you're interested in becoming one, we have a lot of information about Library Aware on our website, and we'll be happy to give you a free demo. You can just contact us. We're going to put a link to this particular landing page in the chat. Does anyone have any questions about the advocacy templates in Library Aware before we wrap up today? I'm just going to scroll through the chat here to make sure. Well, I just want to thank everyone again for coming to today's webinar. And I really appreciate that you took the time to talk with us today. And if you have any questions, you can always email me or call me as well. And thank you so much, and have a great rest of your afternoon.